Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second episode of the Carlyle Podcast with me, your host, Max Carlyle. The theme of this episode is on industry leadership and saw me travel down to London to Wembley Stadium. Ironically, of all the people to see getting off the underground on my way there, I saw ex-Manchester United, former captain of Everton, and current England's women's manager, Phil Neville, which I thought was quite poetic given the theme of the podcast, leadership and all. Nevertheless, it was a great experience to see UCFB's campus at the home of football for the very first time, which was preparing for some NFL action over the coming weekend. My guests were Suzy Morris and Matt Dockray, who have had successful careers in the aviation industry with British Airways and are current leaders in their respective fields of medical insurance and entrepreneur investment. So, this was a little bit different from the sporting norm, but insightful nonetheless. I didn't actually find out who I'd be talking to until sitting down to record with them, so please forgive me for sounding a tad bit robotic with the questions that I prepared in advance. But be assured, there are some pearls of wisdom to be gleaned in the following conversation. Enjoy. Would my two guests just like to introduce themselves and their positions?
Hey, my name's Matt Dockray. I'm currently Head of Customer Experience at Venue Group in London, which is an entrepreneur-led investment group looking after resorts, restaurants, bars, formerly British Airways. So I've worked 20 years in the aviation industry, starting off at Virgin Atlantic and then over at British Airways, recruiting leaders, giving leadership talks, coaching and mentoring over 4,000 remote staff.
Brilliant.
Hi, Suzy Morris here. I work for Helix. We're a medical company and we provide medical insurance to companies who want that for their employees. I've been there 9 years now and I'm a business development manager, so I look after the sales and new business and coach and influence a team under me of account managers and support team.
Welcome to you both. To get the ball rolling, can I just ask you your favourite examples of leaders in sport or football?
As a Villa fan, I'll always go to Dean Smith at the minute as a perfect example, a live example of what leadership is.
Okay.
Coming from a background where he's a Villa fan.
Yeah, I was going to say he's a Villa fan, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a Villa fan. He's gone into a team. He's had doubters, less experience than other people. He's not a Premiership manager by any stretch of the imagination, but he's applied his leadership, thoughts and mentality to those players around him. So the one key thing in football is always keeping your best players, and that relies on a really strong leader. So keep people like Jack Grealish or people like John McGinn. He's identified them as future leaders at an early space and stopped them going to the big clubs and kept them and inspired that. So at the minute, him. But I'm a big rugby fan, and I think it's really topical at the minute. And we're having a discussion just before this that Eddie Jones, as a leader, getting England into the World Cup final isn't just accident or a lucky game. I think we can see how they destroyed New Zealand at the weekend. He changed the mentality of leadership through sport. Instead of having 15 players and some substitutes, he calls them the finishers. It's a 23-man squad. So he uses the mentality of leadership to really get everyone playing for him, whether it's someone who's going to come on for 5 minutes is as strong as someone who's going to play for 70 minutes.
Most definitely. Suzy?
I think I'd have to agree with Matt's last comments about Eddie Jones. I'm a big rugby fan and I think what he's done for the team recently has been absolutely fantastic. I think how he's really developed the team so they are a group as one. But also there are some players within the squad who've probably given him a bit of trouble over the years, but he's stuck with them, he's stuck with the talent and really nurtured that and not kind of said, well, one strike and you're out. He's really just supported them, allowed them to grow and mature, and they're now the team that we see before us, which are in the World Cup final.
Most definitely, and you say you're both big rugby fans. I'm a big fan of combat sports.
Yeah.
So my examples I've got down to start off. Muhammad Ali, for a start, undoubted in his charisma, his personality is just an undoubted leader. A more modern example of that now is Conor McGregor.
Yeah.
He's just planned his return back to UFC action. I mean, Conor McGregor is almost as if he's a brand in and of himself, and it's almost as if he causes himself problems at times with some of the limelight that he gets onto him. Like you were saying about Eddie Jones, without a shadow of a doubt, he's just a natural born leader. More footballing examples, referring to the past that I've looked at growing up. Philip Lahm, FC Bayern Munich legend and World Cup winner in 2014, and Barcelona legend Carlos Puyol. He won the Euros 2008, won the World Cup in 2010. There are some individuals that may not be particularly outspoken or vocal, such as Ronaldinho and Lionel Messi. However, just through their pure ability and technical prowess, just lead by example and just how good they are. So some players / people aren't born natural leaders, but they can grow into that position of responsibility. You've got Lionel Messi addressing the entire Camp Nou with his adoring fans watching on, and if you know anything about Lionel Messi, he's not renowned for being an outspoken person. He doesn't particularly like the limelight on him, like his counterpart Cristiano Ronaldo, who without a doubt a leader, but his personality traits kind of exude that he is a leader. But you've got your more quieter, maybe not commonly associated with the personality traits, necessity to be a leader, but you can grow into that. To arrive in a position of leadership in an organisation that has a fundamental hierarchy or infrastructure, for example a director or a CEO, it is usually a new experience or the first time that they have been delegated such responsibility. How would you describe your individual adaptation process in a leadership position?
That's a long question.
It is. It is.
Yeah, it's funny, and just picking up on a couple of points there. Leadership's one thing. How you communicate it is a completely different measure. So sometimes, if you look at a political leader, it's sometimes the best communicator that ends up in the top position. It's a position of election. It's usually the best orator, the person who does the best speech, the people who can inspire people through talking, is how you inspire through generations, because it's captured in a moment. So that's the whole thing about skill, ability, talent. If you look at Martin Luther King when he did his famous speech, it's done on those words have transcended history, and that wasn't a written speech. I Have a Dream was half off the cuff. So sometimes it's the ability to have a thought process, be confident in your ability to do it, and away you go. Lionel Messi does it through talent and skill alone. There's nothing better than a lovely story of I've come from the humble background and I've created this. It's a common story that I've become the best ever. But to be a natural leader through your talent is so difficult. We've had, if you look at every major sporting team, whether it's an England team or Barcelona, there've been some great individual players who've never made it to captain, who've never made it because they've fallen down in the way they put it across. If you look at Roy Keane, for example, he was a great leader on the pitch. He went out there, absolutely destroyed and terrorised people through his aggressive leadership, that people feared him and people got behind him. Mm-hmm. Yet he's now in a position that everything he comes out with is controversial and people don't believe him because he's doing it in a different format. Yeah. So he's paid to sit there and be a pundit, and he still uses that characteristic. That's what he's there for. But it's funny how people change because he's not through talent alone. Lionel Messi can be a leader with his mouth closed. If you look at every highlight reel, it's phenomenal. And when people come and attack leaders, the first way of doing it is challenge people's integrity. You see it in every kind of election battle or CEO or share price dips because the CEO's been up to this, that, the other. So it happens with Lionel Messi. Suddenly everyone's a tax fraud because they can't attack his ability and talent. Suddenly always tax this, that, the other, or they've had an affair. It's the same formula. That
hanging on to something else.
Yeah, of course it is. They'll go turn up every single... So sometimes it's been cleaner than clean. So your best leaders are the ones who've, not just in front of the spotlight, behind closed doors, have done everything possible to be the best of the best. So it goes a lot deeper than what you see on a pitch and what you see in a press conference. Leadership all the way through is how you've judged yourself and your integrity through every single process, which is why CEOs end up how they are. And it is experience-based. You can have a CEO that's worked in that business for 40 years and become CEO because they've worked every day up from the front line up to where they are. Or you end up with CEOs who've started their own business who are entrepreneurs every night. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But in leadership, in that point of view, it's how you communicate it in front of a camera, on a microphone. But you soon get found out if you're not a natural leader. You can buy your way into being a CEO, but you have to be a leader to stay there. Examples in business at the minute, they've got the WeWork guys. I don't know if you've seen that business model. So it's opening up entrepreneurial office spaces where people go, hire it out, and creating really good entrepreneurial workspaces. They put their initial purchase order, share options out, and it went under overnight because of the way that a leader handled himself in that part of the process because he had very little experience and did it. He went off completely rogue and did it himself, and suddenly the share prices crashed, the business is going to go under because there was no leadership. So sometimes it's understanding your capabilities in the position that you've been given or lucky enough to get or have bought your way into.
Okay, transferring that over to Suzy, in terms of the adaptation process, in particular when you first find yourself in a position of authority or a position of leadership, how do an individual get to grips with finally being in that position of leadership that they may never have even imagined themselves in?
I think it's a really good question. I think whenever anybody is going up through the ranks to the point where you're suddenly having to influence other people, lead other people, manage other people, coach other people, I think it can be daunting at the beginning because, you know, it's a new experience and there's a lot of responsibility that comes with being in a position of influence because ultimately people are looking up to you. And I want to kind of touch on what Matt said about integrity. I think anyone who's leading or influencing or managing people, in order to have people behind you, you really need to have that integrity and earn people's trust. As Matt said, you can buy your way into being, you know, a certain level or, you know, having a certain title, but it means nothing unless people believe in what you can do. And you can have that through, you know, experience, be it in sport or business, you know, working your way through the ranks. So people trust your experience, you know, you've earned your stripes, as it were. But other people are, as Matt said, entrepreneurs. They just start their own thing and people trust them because they really believe in their product and what they're doing. But I think ultimately people have to trust their leader, their manager, in order to go with them so that really they believe in what they're doing, they believe in what they're saying. And that will galvanise people and that will motivate people. I think, as I said before, it's always daunting when you first get into that position. And I think the main thing is to, I'd say, either learn quietly. So, you know, a lot of people don't respond well to an aggressive leader if you're new to a job. I think, you know, you've got to listen to people and really listen to other people's experience as well, because if you're in that position of leadership, you're never going to get every question right. Mm-hmm. And actually, if you surround yourself with yes people, you're not going to get the right kind of feedback. You need people who will challenge you, and that's important in order to get the best for the company or group or team, whoever you're working for.
Definitely, and I think two fundamental principles that you highlighted there, most definitely integrity and trust of those around you. In terms of the balance, what do you believe the balance is between learning from your own experiences and learning from others who were previously in your position?
I think your own experience is obviously key because, you know, you learn hard lessons when things may not go the way you want. But I think you've also got to really align yourself with people who you trust, who you feel are good leaders as well, because ultimately that's who you're learning from, and those experiences that other people go through, maybe failures, maybe successes, actually you can learn from them so you don't have to make those mistakes as well. And I think it is a balance of both. You know, do as well as you can, learn from what hasn't gone as well, but also treat, you know, other leaders that you look up to as mentors. You know, ask them to give you tips, you know, give you advice. What would they suggest? What would they do? Or what did they do when they were in your position? And use as much resource as you can that's available to you.
Definitely. Matt, you'd just like to elaborate in your specific journey, what was the balance between learning from your own personal experiences and learning from those around you or who've previously been in a position?
Yeah, the learning never stops. Every day's a school day. And the whole thing about leading is adaptability. You can be in a privileged position when you're starting out on your career life, is learning from the best and aligning yourself with the right leader. If we look at people in sport now, Jose Mourinho, perfect example, when he's aligned himself with Bobby Robson, who's the greatest leader or manager at that time. Mm-hmm. And he's cherry picking all the way up, and he becomes a great leader now through that process. I like to do exactly the same. I learn a little snippet. So we've got the greatest luxury now with technology that you can watch a TED talk and be inspired for 10 minutes, or you can pick up a paper or listen to a podcast. going back when I started my career in the aviation and brands 20 years ago, you had very little of that. So it was personal communication and talking to people, having that FaceTime. My career started out with Suzy being cabin crew. So you get on a plane, you're locked in for 9 hours with some of the industry's greatest leaders who are travelling around in upper class or first class, and you get to have a chat, you get that FaceTime with them, which has probably been the bones of my career that I've built up on. And just having that adaptability and then inspiring people because you have to lead by example. You can't be a leader unless you can actually lead, and that uses your own experience to build and build and build, and then just changing people's mindset.
You touched on it briefly there, and specifically as my degree is in football, business and media, I'd just like to ask about leadership in a digital age. You've just highlighted there a lot of resources available now that 15, 20 years ago you couldn't have possibly dreamed of. Media coverage and overseas broadcast revenue has reached around £4.35 billion for the season between 2019 and 2022 for the Barclays Premier League. How has new media impacted leadership in your specific industries?
It's benefited it and hindered it. It makes you, I'm trying to articulate in the best way, it's easier to challenge someone's leadership through media, but it's also easier to get a platform. Mm-hmm. If I go to the most recent sort of one that really spiked my interest was Greta Thunberg, is it the 15-year-old who travelled over the Atlantic to talk about climate change and got a platform to sit there with world leaders from her own opinion, and this is someone who skipped school on a Friday because she was so passionate about everything that she did, to really challenge it. So if a 15-year-old can get the world's attention in a digital format and age through how she did it, I mean, that's a perfect example of how everyone can do it. You have to be convicted in your rights to do it, but also understand exactly what you're doing. I don't believe there's a 15-year-old who just said, I'm going to do this. You're surrounded by amazing people who can put you in the right direction, and you cause mass protest, and you can do it, but it relies on the digital age that we're in. So it gives you a great platform. What then comes with that is the attack and the backlash that you get with it that you have to resist. So rather than 10 people in a room saying, well, that's not quite right, you've now got the world's media in your face, and you have to be able to withstand it, which increases the integrity process, it increases the learning, and you have to withstand it. So it's great in one aspect, in that it gives you the biggest platform you could ever imagine and more insight. But on the other side, it really challenges you. You have to be the strongest of the strongest.
Okay, Suzy, would you echo the same sentiment in that way?
I completely agree. I think what I would just add to that is, as well, with that kind of platform comes a responsibility. So especially if you're using social media on behalf of a business, be it in sport, be it anywhere else, what you put out there, you are representing your company, or whoever you work for, whoever you are. And as Matt said, sometimes other people will have differing opinions, and they'll be very quick to put those out there. So you've got to make sure that your responses are measured as well, I believe.
Okay, and Matt, you touched on Greta Thunberg there, and I never thought I'd quite be talking about it on a sports education podcast, but it ties in nicely to a question that I've got, is that leaders are typically of an older demographic in most institutions or organisations. For example, for me, obviously studying media, sports media anchors or news anchors in general. What practical advice can you give to younger people in lesser positions who may think that will never be me?
For me, the definition of leadership is following. The word follow comes with every kind of leader. You have to look at success for founding fathers when you look at media anchors. When you're brought up, when you watch sport, the reason everyone's at this university is because there's an inclination to sport. What I love about it is it gives a nostalgia, it gives a reminiscence. We're sat at Wembley now, I can look out on the pitch and tell you some amazing things. And there's a narrative that goes with every kind of these events. The difference between sitting and watching an event live and sitting at home and watching it on the TV is the person and the leader who brings that in your ear. So everyone at Wembley in 1966 will not have heard the commentary that came to think it's all over, it is now, because you're watching it live. So the one thing the what happens, but the how it's done is the leaders who bring it, whether it's the voice in your ear, whether how it's done, whether it's the inspiration to put sport at the front of everyone's mind. Future generations are inspired by those that came before, and it shouldn't be a matter of, we're going to do better than them. It should be inspired by the success of previous and how we can do better. I think with future generations and the students that I talk to, innovation is always given the wrong focus. Innovation is about taking an idea and making it better, not coming up with the idea in the first place. That's always been my mentality in the way of being done. We spend too much time coming up with ideas that don't work. If an idea is right, it's just who does it best. And that's the leader, that's the person who brings it out to the front.
Definitely, and Suzy, I suppose you could almost add a female perspective to this in terms of industry leadership.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think what you say in terms of the majority of leaders are slightly older and in some industries more male dominated. But I think with anything, like Matt was saying about sport, it's all about being inspired. And, I think a lot of the sports people out there today, it's a dream to be playing for their country or playing for their team. They probably didn't think that it might be possible when they were younger. There were a lot of sports people that just thought, that's what I want to do, but it needs so much determination, commitment to get to the top. And as long as you believe in yourself and you surround yourself with the right people, anything is possible. It really is about kind of the dedication and the determination. Where I work, we've got a really good group of both female and male managers, and I think it's about having that confidence in yourself to know that you can do it, and you can do it as well as the next person. There's room for everybody. It's just about the attitude. And I once heard somebody say to me, you can choose your attitude, how you respond to situations, how you look to the future. It's down to how you feel about it, and you need to just kind of keep moving forward, keep learning. As Matt said, every day's a school day, and just keep trying, and you can get there.
You highlighted the importance of surrounding yourself with the right people, and Matt inferred that for there to be a leader, people have to follow. I think you touched on it briefly earlier, now just to delve into it deeper. In terms of leadership approaches, depending on where you look, you'll find different analysis, but the general consensus is that there are three main leadership techniques. A democratic leadership, obviously predicated on democracy, autocratic leadership, which is a more of an authoritarian approach, and a laissez-faire approach, which is obviously more to people's strength and letting people do as they may. What do you think is the correct balance of leadership styles?
Yeah, it's always a tricky one. It's finding the right balance is depending on the environment, the company, the corporation that you're in, what game you're in on a football pitch relies whether you're 3-0 down. The skill is adapting between there's three, there's four. The best example, I try and contextualise it both ways. I come from a background of being cabin crew. Everyone's perception of cabin crews, you get on a plane and they're there to serve you tea, coffee, make sure you have a nice 7 hours and get there, lovely. The main purpose of a cabin crew is the safety and security of your journey. So if something goes wrong, that they look after you. And the leaders on that plane are tasked with making sure that in an emergency situation, 300 people get out of a plane in 80 seconds safely without it's the strongest leadership in that quick moment to do. So they switch from a laissez-faire approach to leadership, make sure everything's okay, making sure you're okay, maybe a bit of consultative as well. You're trying to arrange breaks for make sure everyone's got some sleep, and then they have to switch to an autocratic dictator, which is the worst leadership you can ever have as a group. I think we see it with Donald Trump. He's the most common autocratic dictator that we've got at the minute. It's my way or the highway. But he's demanded, right, you've got to get out of that seat, you've got to get out that door, you've got to get with the medical equipment. And this is why I'm always inspired by that leadership approach, because it shows adaptability. We can see it in every single major sporting event. If you're 3-0 up, it's a consultative approach. You see it on the touchline, you might get the assistant manager down, what should we do there, should we bring them on? That's it. When it slips and you're 3-0 down, suddenly it becomes that autocratic dictator. Well, you move here, you move here. And we've seen so many examples, it just doesn't work.
Okay, and Suzy, would you agree that it's dependent on the different variables and that adaptation of the environment?
Completely. And I think where some leaders go wrong is that they will only use one style. And as Matt said, you've got to be adaptable. And I think as well, in kind of different situations, so for example in sport, if you've got a team that's really learning, they're not particularly skilled, you need an approach which is more kind of autocratic, so you're almost teaching, and then as that group gets more skilled, they gel together, again it's a bit more democratic. and then you can give them kind of a bit more free rein when, the set pieces are working. As Matt said, you're 3-0 up, you just let them show their flair. And it's the same in business. When people start off in a role, they probably need a bit more help. They probably need a bit more kind of teaching. And then as people get competent in what they're doing, again, that's where you can, I suppose, loosen the reins and give them a bit more kind of freedom to think on their own.
Definitely. I'd just like to hit you with a quote now. I'm currently listening to an audio book by a Canadian psychologist called Dr. Jordan Peterson. I don't know if you've came across him before, but a quote that's really stuck out for me when he's talking about leadership is, people are motivated when they're undertaking an act that is associated with a desire. Such is fundamental to motivation. So just on man management and motivating a team or group of individuals, how far would you say you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I call it the shiny culture. So it's easier when you've got a goal in front of you that's a nice shiny target to achieve it. So if you get a team of people and go, we're going to win this, brilliant, and they've got the skills, they've got the adaptability, you've got the leadership, sometimes life becomes easy. Where people fall down, it's the hard work and the training that needs to go into it. It's hard to context that. So if you say, like, if we go the chef de mission, when every time they go to an Olympics and they say, we're going to win 27 gold medals, and I turn around, I've got 27 gold medalists, that's not a hard task to do. That's being at the best of the best, and they understand it. If I want to win 27 gold medals and no one in that team's ever won a medal before, suddenly that changes the task. And the motivation is you can take someone who you can instill the belief. The reason they're there is because they've got the ability. So the task changes based on that target. And then that's when the leadership, the examples, the ability all galvanise and come together. But it can also be people's downfall. People who don't adapt, people who stay in one kind of management style or leadership style and then get put in a different environment and don't want to adapt. Like Jose Mourinho is a perfect example. One of the greatest managers, coaches, mentor anyone could work with. Put him in the Manchester United limelight when suddenly the environment isn't right for him, or he can't adapt, or he's under the scrutiny because the previous leader before that, so you got Van Gaal, David Moyes and Alex Ferguson. The key element becomes time. Alex Ferguson had all the time in the world. I think if you go right back to his career, he was going to get sacked, and someone gave him a chance on it because he wasn't getting the results with following Ron Atkinson. And then he was given the time, and it came, and he says himself, when it gets to the youth of, I can't remember which year it is, I'm getting old, but the David Beckham, Neville, Scholes, Giggs era, he was lucky to have that amount of talent in one fell swoop to match his leadership and ability to galvanise and put that together. It was unstoppable.
I'd just like to say, I think I disagree on that point about Jose Mourinho. I think it's more of an issue with the Manchester United machine more than Jose Mourinho. But I think alongside Pep Guardiola, without shadow of doubt, two of the finest managerial brains of our time. Just over to Suzy in terms of that, in terms of man management, that goal attainment, the smart targets that are measurable and attainable, relevant to the group of people that you are handling. How important do you think it is to make those goals sizable?
I think that's really important. I think, as Matt said, if you've got a goal on a short term in front of you, it's very easy to see that and feel that. It's when you're putting in months of hard work. So, as the example was mentioned before, the Olympics, you've got 4 years to train for that. Every weekend that you're not seeing your friends, you're not seeing your family, you're tired, it's putting in that kind of effort. So you do need to break those kind of goals down. But I think as well it's important to realise what motivates people. Some people will be, well, I would say, kind of externally motivated. It might be money, it might be a bonus, it might be a promotion, something like that. Other people are intrinsically motivated, so it's something inside them. It might be doing well for your teammates or whatever it might be. And I think it's really important for a leader to understand that about the group of people that are following them to really get the best out of people.
A great example of holding high standards for yourself is, as you mentioned, the Olympics. To touch on the dichotomy of high standards, if you will, personally for myself, I'd like to imagine that I hold myself to particular high standards, that I want to achieve what I can through the highest level of performance and to the best of my ability. Along with high standards comes pressure, anxiety inducing. But do you believe it's a necessity to become a leader?
everything. You've got to be a leader, you've got to have a goal as well, to put people on a pedestal and get to where you're going to go. Another example, David Brailsford. He was the one who brought marginal gains to the forefront about Tour de France and how you get there. Getting it as forensic as making sure the person on that tour has got the pillow that they've got at home, because getting 10 minutes less sleep would affect their next goal. So everyone's got this trail of perfection, and perfection allows for no slip up whatsoever. Perfection allows for zero. Excellence allows for you to learn from your mistakes. And I think this is where people go wrong, is they look for perfection to become the best of the best. Excellence allows you to have a mistake, learn from it, have the time to get the coach and a mentor and everything put in place to become better and better. The standard applies to the environment that you want. In football, it's judged by trophies rather than improvement or getting up through the leagues or winning the FA Cup. Some of the greatest teams that ever existed don't win any trophies. Leadership, so look at Pochettino at the minute. The big debate is, should Harry Kane stay at Tottenham because he's not going to win any trophies? Yet Pochettino has the highest standards. They got beaten in the Champions League final, and we're judged in the moment. And this is where your standards might be great, but it's the standards of the people who are following you and looking at you and under the microscope that fall down. So this goes back to how you articulate it. Does Pochettino sit there and go, I'm going to win the Champions League, I'm going to do better? Does Harry Kane ever come out and go, I'm only in this business to win every single trophy? Sometimes it's having to articulate what you're there for, because that allows for scrutiny, allows for people to chip away at your integrity, and that cyclical loop comes back again. Most footballers will sit there and go, brilliant, we're millionaires. Some do it for the money, some do it for the pride, some do it for the trophies, some do it for getting to the World Cup. Articulating your standards, having the highest standards in what you want to achieve, and just keeping that commentary going, that's the ultimate key for me.
Different motivations, but a uniting factor is obviously those high maintaining standards. Suzy, how fundamental do you believe the team around you holding the same high standards is for you to achieving said goals?
I think it's absolutely essential. I think to have common goals for everybody to work to really high standards, it motivates everybody else, because if I'm not working to the best of my ability, how can I expect anybody else to? And I think anyone who's played team sport understands that, a win isn't down to one person or one good player. It's everybody working together for the common good. So it's really important that everyone feels that they're part of a team or part of a group that is working together to make that goal. In the business that I'm in, the reason I'm able to sell is because the people behind me are fantastic at what they do, and that allows me to go out with integrity and talk to people so they want our services. And it's the same in sport, it's the same in any kind of business. You need everybody to be working together as a team.
To move on to discipline, this obviously is a university podcast, and when talking to students about discipline, it may not be the perfect target audience, as obviously it's almost the shortfalls that catch people out. Got my fair share of mates who, sleep in too much or have a late night.
I'm sure we never did that.
No, I was in by 9 every night.
Yeah, definitely.
But in terms of the value of discipline, there are many different forms, I feel. Things such as waking up consistently at a time in the morning or going to sleep at a certain time at night. Do you believe that vision and that direction starts with the individual?
I think it does. I think, you've got to be motivated to get out of bed, to make your bed in the morning, to start your day well. I think we all have those days where we just want to crawl under a duvet. But, you get out there and you do it. It's a bit like exercise. Some days you really don't fancy it, but as soon as you do it, you feel great, you do it again. Obviously, certain values are probably instilled as you're growing up by your mates around you. If I remember back to my uni days, if all my mates were, revising for exams and I was doing nothing, I'd feel pretty bad about that. You want to be the same as your peers, I guess, as well. But I think it does start with yourself, and I think you've got to take responsibility for what you want to get out of life, be it your uni results, be it playing for the team you want to play for, be it getting a position in business. Ultimately, unless you take responsibility for that, you're not going to get anywhere, because nobody else is going to do it for you.
And Matt, In terms of tips and tricks to maintain and self-discipline, how were you able to maintain that certain level of drive and motivation to stay disciplined to get where you are today?
This goes back to individuality, because everyone's different. We're all a lump of bones, tissue. We're a big brain with wires going everywhere. We talked briefly before coming in this room. There's stress is the biggest thing that drives every human being, and that sort of gets us out of bed in the morning. You need it in your life. So there's a big thing called the stress bucket, that getting you up in the morning is stress induced. You go through your day with the right level of stress will create that discipline. If you get too much in your life, you get too little in your life, that's me, I'm going to stay in bed tonight, I'm going to get up. So the main core is listening to yourself. You find your own discipline. Don't listen to regimented ideas of everyone that came before you, and listen to yourself and your own body. You might be someone that does better at 10 o'clock in the morning. Other people get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. You'll see every Instagram post at the minute going, I'm up at 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm the first in the office, I'm last out the office. It's different for different environments. We're sat here having consultancies with major companies about how do we adapt the environment for these people, because some people want to get in late. I work in an environment now that's 10 o'clock in the morning till 6, because it's entertainment and lifetime industry, so people do stay in a little bit later. It doesn't mean they're ill-disciplined, but I've come from an airline background where you were flying through the night, you were up all night, you had to be last out the office to prove your worth. It's listen to yourself, create your own timetable based on your success. And if you need to go out for a beer, go for a beer. Going back to your Lionel Messi point, people who have got great ability have had no life skills as well. Life skills are one of the most important things in any kind of business. How you talk to people, how you can relate to people, how you can understand. You can't do that locked in a room by yourself, swatting away. You can't learn from other people if you're not sat in a bar or going out as a part of a group or being part of a union. You cannot get experience sat talking to yourself. So discipline, absolutely find your own discipline. What works for you, write that timetable down, because that's a blueprint for success for the next person or the people that you're inspiring. Getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and making your own bed's brilliant, but that just creates a rhythm in your head. Getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning didn't make anyone worse in life, but what works for you, and then apply that. If it works, tell other people and listen to what they do, and just create your own unity, create your own business in your head, and it'll work. Yeah.
In that sense, familiarising yourself with your own capabilities and your own work ethic. A great source of motivation that I've got onto at the moment is a guy called David Goggins, who's an ex-Navy SEAL who runs ultra marathons. Every second of every day he seems to be out running somewhere. Like, it just that unrelenting idea of almost forcing a different personality that ignores the other voice in your head that tells you, like Susie mentioned, to stay in, to put the duvet over your head.
Going back to, I mean, we've raised some brilliant points all the way through this. Going back to your point about when you set your goals, you've got a decision to make. Can I do this and still achieve my goal, or is it going to affect it? That's the voice in the back of your head. Everything you're doing is, I want to stay here, I want to do this. The joy of this podcast is that you can't see that I'm 6'1", 20 stone. I can't run an ultra marathon. The thoughts of doing it, but I look at it, does it benefit? It could make me more disciplined. I could be healthier. I could do this. There's always a voice in the back of your head. I could sort of do that. Yeah, I look at the business side of it and how focused I am on that. One detracts from the other. If I put all my mental space into being a 15 stone, absolutely ripped with a 2% body fat, I've no doubt in my mind that I could achieve that. But that's going to steer away from my business goals at the minute, and it's what's achievable and knowing your abilities. So everything I'm focused on at the minute is I'm working in an entrepreneurial startup business that has got huge investment, that has gone from a couple of bars in London to a worldwide entity in the space of months because of that drive and passion. And you've got to get on that bus straight away and be part of that. And if I gave any headspace to anything else, it sometimes doesn't happen. And this is the downfall, because everyone's situation is different. My voice in the back of my head is my wife and little one at home who's 8 years old. And if I'm there at 10 o'clock at night because I'm driving the business, but it's attaching the right goal, because the reason I'm there at 10 o'clock is, do you know what, in a couple of months and the next year, she can go to the best school and she can have the best wedding. And so there's little goals and little games and everything you put up and keep yourself motivated. But it's what works for you. So if it's business, you've got to focus, you've got to be aligned, you've got to understand your goals and your abilities, and not overload yourself with admiration and goals or things you'd like to achieve. And this comes down to that ultimate question: what do you want and what do you need? It's the ultimate coaching question. What you want's great, but what you need is the ultimate goal. I'd love to be a multimillionaire with a great body with a bit of hair, but sometimes it's not achievable. But what I need is the best career, stick to my morals, create a great environment for my little one to be inspired by. And it's not about leading in business. Sometimes it's leading in your family and those around you. That person that everyone looks up to and go, they're a great mate because they instill leadership in me.
I think it's a really important point because, as Matt said, we all need a certain level of stress to get us motivated to do things. And sometimes some of the scariest situations, say if you're, doing a presentation or for the first time or what have you, it's really nerve-wracking. You think, oh, I really don't want to do this. I'm really nervous. And then you do it and you achieve it and you feel amazing. And that gives you confidence to do more. So there's a certain level that you need. However, I think we've all been in that situation where you feel overwhelmed. There is so much going on, and you feel a little bit out of your depth. You said imposter syndrome. I think a lot of leaders, when they first got into that position, have that feeling. It's almost the fake it till you make it. So you kind of, you pretend you know what you're talking about, and then eventually you will know what you're talking about. And I think everybody goes through that. I think confidence comes with time, but I think it's really finding that balance. As Matt said, it's really a personal thing. So I know if I'm really stressed with work, I can get very kind of tunnel visioned and ignore everything else. Matt will claim that I don't pick my phone up for days on end if I'm particularly busy, which is fair. I know I need to go out for a run or go to the gym or something like that. Some people want to go and meditate. Some people do, they just sit and read. And everybody is very different in the same way as Matt said. Some people work better in the morning, some in the evening. You've got to listen to your body and talk to people. Other people have different ways of really combating that stress. Don't beat yourself up about it. Everyone gets stressed at exams, everyone gets stressed at certain times of their lives, but that will pass. And, every achievement that you make will allow you, to improve, and the next situation won't be as scary.
Okay, and stress, obviously, as you mentioned, is relative, but there does come times where stress is at an all-time high, or you're in a time of crisis. I'm currently studying a module on public relations strategy, which obviously highlights and emphasises the importance of crisis management. Crisis management teams will consist in a hierarchy with a leader. How does leadership change under pressure or during a time of crisis?
It's a great question because it's determined by what crisis is. So let's go back to the aviation industry. So if you can imagine when God forbid it happens, a plane goes down somewhere or something happens or you're in an emergency situation, we have a thing called Gold Command. So all the best leaders or appropriate leaders sit in a room, and it's detaching yourself from the emotion. The hardest thing that clouds anything is emotion. First rule of any kind of crisis management is let's take the emotion out of it, because stress comes in, fear, all the instincts that you're brought up with come to the forefront, and you cannot make a valuable decision based on that. It's having that cold as ice eyes to look at it in a very lateral manner and go, right, we need to do this. So the best advice is stress you need, because it helps you make a decision. When it's over the limit and you've got to quell all those fears. So the number one thing in crisis management and leadership is take a deep breath, step away, have a little think, and follow an easy for me to say, an autonomous process and a blueprint. And that's why every major survival service, whether it's the fire, police, follow a process. And it's a really weird thing. If you watch any program with police or fire or ambulance, it's the weirdest language. There's no compassion. It's crisis management situation. Going back to this autocratic dictator. Going into the secrets of cabin crew. I know we're sport and we'll bring it back to it when we're back on a pitch. But when a pilot is in a crisis situation, the first thing they do is take their hands off the controls, because the first thing you want to do is instincts. You start grabbing hold of things. So they put their hands on their laps and they follow there's checklists all over a cockpit or a flight deck, list of, in a fire, this is what you do. And you take emotion completely out of it. that's the simplest rule to do in the world. How you get there is because it might be crisis. You're sat in your university now and you're thinking, I've got exams tomorrow, I've got to do this. It's last minute. Stress takes over, and then stress and emotion then leads to, but you know what, I'm going to have a beer. I'm going to have to do
mechanisms.
And this is where the right coping mechanism can help. The biggest, when it's mindfulness or going for a run, when you then use a coping mechanism that induces more stress and more emotion or can affect that chemical balance, that's where it goes wrong. We in industry, where it's the chef culture, we sit down with head chefs, Michelin star restaurants, they use cocaine and drugs to get themselves through it because, it'll just help me go and drive, and then take that away from the situation, everything falls to pot. The same with footballers, their vices is gambling, and they turn to every single coach in the world to try and get better, when sometimes it's taking the emotion out of it, focusing on yourself and understanding a crisis is always resolved. That's the whole point of it.
Okay, Suzy, although vices do present themselves, how quintessential do you believe a strategic approach is during a time of crisis?
I completely agree with Matt. Obviously, from being in the airline industry as well, you see people in a room who are dealing with a crisis, and they go through a checklist, as Matt said, very calmly, the emotion out of it. You see it with medics, you see it in so many industries where you're dealing with a crisis. And we used to teach the pilots, or kind of put them through courses where it was called human factors. So you'd look at, if a pilot's flying the plane and you have somebody who's having a heart attack down the back, their instinct would normally be, okay, well, we need to get onto the ground, get this person help. But actually, there are so many other things that they have to think about, including, are we flying over Africa at 3 a.m? Do these people are they inoculated against, different diseases that will be present there? Do they have a tow truck that will take the plane back off the stand if they land? All those different things that they have to think about, and they can't look at all those variables if they're worrying about a stressful situation in terms of, will that person survive? What they do is they look after their role with their checklist, leave the cabin crew to look after that passenger, and a decision is made kind of together as to what the best way is forward. But, as Matt said, stress and emotion can really overthrow you if you're in a crisis situation. So to have a plan and to stick to it, obviously you need to adapt where it's necessary, but I think that is really a key to getting through that.
A great example of an industry specific crisis management team there, definitely. And obviously, just to conclude now, I'd just like to touch upon almost the psychology of a leader, and the personality traits commonly associated with being a leader. So obviously, as we touched on, there are natural leaders. I suppose a few personality traits that I've got noted down: extroversion, conscientiousness, assertiveness, and openness to experience. How far would you agree with that?
Yeah, personality plays a huge. You've got to put yourself out there. You've got to be comfortable standing in front of people and instilling belief and ideas. We do a seminar and a session on leadership, and it's determined by the people who follow you. There's good and bad in everything. So we put a big screen up, and it's got a picture of Donald Trump, Stalin, Hitler, all these. They're leaders, but the beliefs that they've instilled in people are some of the most horrible things you could even imagine in humankind. So sometimes they demonstrate the best leadership behaviours, but for completely wrong.
Predicated on terrible belief systems.
Yeah, exactly. So the great leader is getting the right beliefs and the right installation, the right sort of focus. Sometimes you might be a great leader, but for completely all the wrong reasons. This goes back to autocratic dictators who've got a belief in their head, and no matter what they're going to do, they're going to show the resilience, all these traits that you'd inspire future leaders, but they're doing it for the wrong reasons. My number one thing for all leadership now, and to add to that list, is questioning, asking why. Just don't sit there and go, right, I'm just going to do this. It's why. Every situation that's ever, why am I doing this? It's an instinctive question. Well, why should I do that?
Okay. And Suzy, just to conclude the podcast, have you any practical tips for unnatural leaders, those that may be introverted or inclined to narcissism or maybe too agreeable?
I think one of the things that we touched on before was having people learning from mentors, learning from leaders who have qualities that you want to develop. Not everyone has all the qualities that they would naturally see in a leader automatically, but I think there's lots to be learned from watching people, talking to people. I think also, just listening to people, getting feedback from different situations, because if you're not a confident person, try and put yourself out there, try and put yourself in situations that are slightly uncomfortable, because the more you do it, the more comfortable you become. Not everyone is a confident public speaker, but the more you do it, the less stressful it seems, because you're just used to it. And someone told me something once about, feeling uncomfortable in a situation. That stress level can't continue at its height for, hours upon hours. So if you put yourself in a situation that really is out of your comfort zone, the longer you stay in it, naturally it will kind of desensitize. So although it might feel difficult at the time, just keep doing it.
Brilliant. Suzy, Matt, it's been a tremendous learning experience for myself, and I'm sure for the audience that are listening in on this podcast, there are a few great tips that they can pick up on. Thank you very much for your time.
Cheers, thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.